This is week 2, so we're looking at finding the ideas, what materials you might need for the ideas, and then owning those ideas. And next week we'll talk more about like transferring those ideas into actual applications and funding and pitching, things like that. So by the end, hopefully you'll have at least one idea that's ready to send or pitch or submit, because a lot of these people just have, a lot of the funders just have online portals that you submit your materials and then you sit back and wait. So that's what's happening. Okay. So week 2, today we're going to talk about developing your idea, where it comes from, creating materials required to take that idea to market, shaping that idea into a tangible material to pitch. There's a variety of those materials. What's intellectual property and how do you secure it? There's a bunch of kind of legal producer talk going to happen in the second half, and who can help you do this stuff. So hopefully you guys are, oh, that's interesting. Yes. So hopefully today you'll leave knowing what materials you might need, and what elements, all these different things that you would create around that particular idea. What is intellectual property and how do you secure it? And then how do you exploit it? We'll get into more of that next week, of course, which is talking more about the numbers and the people we go to. Before I go any further, one of the things that happened is we've delayed this, and it was not known at that point, but CBC came out with a relief package, which is really development money, except for shorts, which is production money. And so you should go to that. It was sent out by Renee, but there's a CBC relief fund. It's $2 million. They're going to put it into some development money, into a couple different strands, and also into the shorts program. So for shorts, they're looking for, 30 minutes or under, I think it is, could be 40 or under. And it has to be done and delivered in 3 months. And they're looking for just stuff to entertain and look at things. Whereas some of the other strands, which are more development, where they'll be like, yeah, okay, we'll give you some development money to put towards making a bigger project. And that might be, whatever, I guess. So look at that. That's the deadline, is the 24th. So we won't even be done next week by the time that comes. So 24th is coming up very, very quickly in a few days. So if you want to get an application in, the process to apply is pretty simple. The other one that we do have more time on, which was the Bell 5 TV1. So that's another decision maker, a funder, Bell, the nonprofit of Bell, that said, we're trying to put some money into some Atlantic productions. We got some money. We want to spend it by September. So hit us up with some projects. Both of those things we should keep in mind as we move forward, because those are specific places where you might send your ideas to. But of course, there's many more. Okay. So let's go on to the next thing, which is week 3 next week. Well, we will try to put this stuff into more action we'll talk about grant writing, fund writing, taking those materials a little bit more. I'm going to show you some examples, and then talking about your pitch, really, because that's your idea. And then where you go specifically with those ideas, those 2 examples I just gave you, which would be Bell and CBC. And then we'll hopefully have time to dig into some detailed budgets and financial scenarios. So anyone new this week? I think there might only be one, if I'm correct, and that would be Louise. I think so, yeah. So Louise, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I my camera off just because I think it slows down my connection. Not sure, or I don't have to look at myself. I'm not sure which one. But hi.
Yeah, both good.
Looking forward to this.
Yeah, and so you can see on the intro that the only thing I said, yeah, like I know you, so we don't have to do this, but this was just what we did last week briefly, which is just to give, I just wanted an idea of the different levels that people are at here. And and I know you, so we don't need to do that. So thanks for joining us,
Okay,
and
great.
enjoy. And again, if you need to chat, send it through the chat, or you can unmute and we can go forward. But yeah, keeping your image off is fine. That way you can eat your sandwich or check cell phone or whatever you need to. And I won't see you, but if you want to be on, that's fine too. You can't see me, I don't think, but if you need to, maybe I'll turn this off every now and then so you can actually see me. But you can hear me. So that's intros. One thing I did last week is I went through my bio super quick, and I just want to, I just did a quicker version, a different version of this. So I've been doing this for quite a while. I've lost track. I was at 60 or 70 successful applications of several years back, and I just stopped keeping track. So I should do that again. But I have written a lot of grant applications, and many, and failed on many, but have also succeeded on many. So I know how to do that stuff. And I've been, like on a lot of juries, and that's also helpful because you're on the other side listening to people pitch their projects to you. And yeah, like some big juries where we've given out like $12 million for a bunch of people. So, it's good to sit on the other side if you get a chance to do that. If anyone ever asks you to be on a jury, do it. Also, yeah, I've been in many festivals. I think, I've attended, I think I counted recently, over 60 festivals and markets, and I've had awards from over 20, I believe now. So, and I just found out today that we have a film screening in Austin at a film festival there. So that's great. It just keeps coming if you keep trying. Sundance. So we did, I did get 15 grand once from them, which was awesome. And we did win the Pitch This at TIFF, which was 10 grand at the time. It's 15 grand now for you guys. And I was selected to pitch at the Hot Docs Forum. I didn't end up pitching on that. It's a longer story about a project that I worked on for quite a while and then didn't end up pitching it, but they did pitch. And I've been invited to the Reykjavik Talent Lab, and I didn't get to go that time, but hopefully I will get to go this year. And I did the Talent Lab at TIFF before. So those are just experiences where you get to mentor and be mentored and hang out with a bunch of inspiring filmmakers. So homework from last week, if you guys remember. Oh, you can see me. That's amazing. Okay, great. So when I go like this, thanks, Nathan. What was I going to say? Yes. The homework from last week was to start your business plan, essentially, because it is a useful tool, and I would encourage you to continue to do that. So, this was just, what's your company name, an executive summary, the company description, like what you do and the products and services that you provide. Very basic stuff. Not a lot of projections of like what you could expand on this and say, this is what I'd like to do over the next 4 years with my company. This is the amount of money we'd like to earn, gross, the gross amount of money we'd like to bring in and the money we'd net. That's another element of a business plan. And also even, I talked about briefly, SWOT analysis, where you identify the strengths of your company over the others, the weaknesses, and then your opportunities and your threats. All that adds up to a pretty decent business plan. If you had all of that in a couple pages and you submitted it along with your applications to some of these funders, they see that you're serious about this, and it tends to come true as well, which is useful. But we're moving on now. So we're going to talk about development. That's really what these 3 weeks are about: taking your project or projects and moving them forward and getting money for them, getting greenlit, we would say, or that sort of thing. So we're going to try to, I'm just going to move something here. We're going to try and do that. Oh, I have a new participant, and I'm going to admit, there we go. It doesn't, it's a little flaw here, but it doesn't really pop up necessarily, but we'll see. Anyway, so moving along, yes, what was I saying? We are discussing development, right? Now, development is, I've got projects in my folder in my filing cabinet that probably are 10, 12 years old, and they're in development. I air quotes around that, but they may never get made. There's a project I even shot a bunch of footage for. You could say it's in production, and a couple of those, in fact. But, I'm talking about development, like hot, new, exciting projects that you're pitching to people in development. Again, it could be something you'd blow the dust off because it's appropriate right now. So keep a file of those things. So the next phase after development, we're going from idea to yes. Someone said yes, and I have to deliver this in 3 months' time. So pre-production would be the next phase after this. We're not going there. We're not going to production. We're not talking about post, marketing, promotion, any of that stuff. We're just talking about development. Just want to let everyone know about that. Now, let's start producing. So we talked last week about your role as a producer, and idea was just to get the concept of what producing in a production company is and what they do. Now let's go on to what I say is your bread and butter, which is your projects. Now, where do those projects come from? We're going to talk about that. Ideas for projects. Everyone has lots of ideas, right? Now, turning those into film or TV is an uphill battle for sure. I've definitely had people talk to me because, oh, you make films, or oh, you work at the film co-op when I did that. And they was just phone and say, I have this idea. And you're like, okay, great. That's not really much until you start to turn it into something. So that's your job as the producer. Sometimes a director will come to you. Sometimes you are the director and producer. But at the same time, as a producer, what you're going to do is try to formulate these ideas into something. So you find the idea, you refine an idea and get the funding to make it happen. That's really what your goal is here. This is the development phase. That's what we would call it. So what is development? Let's go into it. These are the things that you would do. Coming up with an original idea, that's one option for development. That's pretty common. I'd say probably most of you are in that boat, but there are lots of other places. You might hear a story from someone. You might could be just around the dinner table. That definitely happened to me, where, you know, someone's just telling a story and you just like, wow, that is so compelling. You might read an article in a magazine or newspaper and think, wow, that is really interesting. I was listening to a podcast yesterday and there was they were reviewing they interviewed someone who had written a book, and that book, I was like, wow, could be a really good story. So I will pursue that and see. It's a Canadian story and it's a new book, so it might be available. A poem could be a play. Certainly that's happened a lot, where you go see a play and you're like, I'm going to option that play and turn it into a movie. It could even be a joke. I've seen short films that are basically just turning a joke into a visual version of that. Obviously, one of the big things is, literature. If a book is out there, I read a horror, what we call it, YA, I guess, young adult horror, that was written by this woman who's in Nova Scotia. She was put out on Penguin. It's a pretty big label, and it's a pretty good book. And then I went to her and I said, has it been optioned? I talked to her, I met her, and I left a note actually for her. And then she called me, and then she said it's not optioned yet. So I have given the book or I told my partners to read the book. I don't know if they've read it yet. A couple of friends that do horror with me. And I said, we might want to option this. It's good. So that's how you might take a novel and you take that and you could turn it into a play, into a movie, by having someone translate the novel into a script. Or someone else might approach you with an idea, of course, like a director or someone. So original ideas, they tend to be easier than many of those. Like the first one is easier than all of those other ones. Because there is no, we'll get into this, chain of title already. It's an idea you came up with. So that means you have the rights and you can begin to exploit those rights. So that's a simple good thing about it. Your company just needs to option these rights from you. Now that might seem weird. It's like, it's my idea, or here's my script, or I came up with that idea, but you are an individual and your company will need to have paperwork, which we'll go into later today, of how and why they get to exploit it. So it really is just what we call a transfer of rights. You could say, this is my original idea. It literally could be a paragraph. And then the company is getting the rights is optioning the rights to turn it into something. That's really basic, super simple. We call that chain of title. And then the next one would be, and the company is going to pay or $1 for you to write the script. And that way the company now owns those materials, or has an option on those materials. Right. So then you just then you hire yourself to write it. You could hire yourself to research it. You could even direct it or whatever, but all of those things eventually, if you're going through proper chain of title, we just need a little document on each of those that says that you've given those rights to the company. Conceiving the idea. What are you trying to say? So this is taking a sort of a step back and thinking about the idea. When you start to think of an idea, maybe you have an idea. I had one last week. What is boredom? And it seems like something that people are talking about these days. So, okay, there's an idea, but what is it? What are you trying to say with that idea? And then who is the audience? And I'll often go back to that with you guys is saying, always think of the audience. Who is the audience? Right now, there is definitely an audience for what is boredom, because I think there's a lot of people that their lives have been changed quite a bit by COVID, and they're in their homes. So what are you going to do about boredom? What is boredom? Why are you bored? What's the history of boredom? That type of thing. And what audience? And then how would you tell that? What type of style? Is it a jokey, funny kind of look at something? Or is it a deeper, more complex thing? What genre is it? That type. It's important to start thinking about these things. And then, of course, which we're going to go into, don't forget to secure the rights to those stories. So if I read an article about it and I was referencing that article, I might need to contact the person who wrote that article and ask for permission and get a piece of paper that says, yes, you can do that. But if it's my idea, actually it was my partner and I, we just said that, it might even be her idea. So maybe I want to talk to her about licensing that idea. So there's two components to this. The theme, when I'm talking about conceiving the idea into something, what is this about? And then more about the plot, what happens. So if it was a documentary about boredom, a short documentary, we'll say, it's a documentary. Okay, that sort of gives us a sense of what it is. Is it light and fluffy, whatever? Okay, what's the plot though? The plot would be, okay, I'm going to go online and interview people who are dealing with boredom in various ways. Yeah, there's a plot. Each time it's a different person. We move from person to person to person. Kind of, we would call that a survey documentary. And in the end, you have like a kind of a survey, like a menu of looking at boredom. That would be an example. Well, what if I was going to try and do it as a narrative and write a script for it? That would be quite different. And the plot might be, alarm bell goes off, guy wakes up, it's the same day. It feels like the same day again. Is this like Groundhog Day for COVID-19, that kind of thing? And then maybe you play out that each day he tries to do something and then can't, and then tries to redo it because of being stuck at home. Whatever, bad examples, but you get the idea. Okay, so let's move on to format, because once you start with that idea, you have to kind of figure out how's that going to play out. And I just started talking a bit about that. Turning the idea into a project means deciding, what format. That's important. Is it a short film? Is it a feature film? Now, these films tend to be, one would say, they can only happen once. It's like a big event, a big change, a big thing, like one thing that happens. Whereas a series tends to have what we would say an engine that drives it that maybe never ends. Or, of course, there are limited series where it's just a elongated feature film. So something like Big Little Lies. So, I mean, again, they had it so successful, they made another season, but that happens sometimes when you have a limited series and it's successful, they'll just figure out another way to continue it. But series, of course, there's serialized. So, the format might be, I'm going to stick 5 people, or was it 6? 6 people in an apartment in New York, and I'll call it Friends. And so each week, each week depends on the previous week, and you kind of have to follow it to a degree. Sitcoms are a bit different, of course. But episodic, a series would be where you could mix and match those episodes completely, and it wouldn't matter. Each episode really has a full standaloneness. And of course, there's a combination of these now where it is a bit serialized and a bit episodic, where you want to follow along with the characters' developments and see if the unrequited love is ever resolved, but also those episodes could be mixed and matched. And then there's the anthology. I use the Romanoffs because that was Matthew Weiner's recent series. He also did Mad Men, which was definitely serialized. But this anthology, it just has a thread, and each episode hangs on that thread, but they tend to be just standalones. So it's almost, and in fact, this one feels like feature films, but a whole bunch of them that just have a thread that tie them together. So these are just a variety of formats that you might want to consider. Now, again, it could be documentary, as I mentioned earlier with the boredom idea, but I mean, could be narrative. it could be experimental. Those are the three I threw at you last week as kind of the three silos that definitely get mixed and matched, but that's an option. And then there's hybrid, of course, that could be any of these combined, mixed and matched as well. I've done projects that are all three of them in one. I'm just going to check to make sure. Yep, I don't think we have any new people. We're good. Yeah, so I've been talking super fast, but I think I'm doing well because we have a lot to cover. Again, you might also want to think about the medium. What do I mean by that? It could come later, of course, but is it live action? Is it animation? Because or maybe a combination of those, but I'm going to make a film. Imagine you and I want to make a film called Gravity, and it's set in space about this woman that gets catapulted out of a mess of spaceship, and she's floating around trying to get back to Earth or whatever, and we had $5,000 to make it. Well, maybe animation is the way to go because live action is going to be ridiculous, or maybe there's a different way to approach it. So you got to think about, again, your idea and what medium might be best applicable to it within the budget and the money that you have. So I'll just talk briefly about documentary because this is kind of a thing I do a fair bit of. There's many styles of documentary. I won't go into them too much at all, but it could be, as an example, okay, it's a historical documentary. So you need to consider as a format and medium, are there recreations? Because recreations is practically narrative and very expensive, especially if it's period. So you're like, it's a documentary about Romans. Okay, and I'm going to do recreations. That just means a lot of money and very challenging. So you need to consider these things. So of course, the options are endless. Therefore, you need to decide what idea is right, or more. It's like chicken and egg. I have an idea. What format, what style, what's it going to fit into? What box is going to work best for this? And I've heard a lot of people pitch things like, here's my idea. It could be a TV show. It could be a series. Could be a feature film. It could even be a play. And that's possibly true, but I would encourage you to really try to narrow that down to what you think it is best. And if you're pitching it to a broadcaster or a decision maker and they say, well, what about this? Then, say for sure I considered that, but don't get too broad with that idea. I would be careful. So I have an example. So what is fear? That was an idea that I thought about around this thing, like a documentary, or what could it be if I wanted to explore what is fear? Because I think a lot of us, it's pretty close to the surface for us right now, especially after this weekend. So what is fear? And then that's a theme really, but what's the plot, or how are we going to explore that? So that's something, let's take a minute and just to think about that, because there's many ways to go about it, endless ways. Is it a drama? Is it a documentary? Is it kind of avant-garde? Am I going to do it as an animation or a drama, or narrative with live action? Is it a genre? What genre is it? What ways do I want to explore this idea? So those are things to consider. Okay. So now let's assume you've nailed it. You're like, this is everyone that you tell about this idea. They're like, oh man, what a great idea. Then now you have to decide what format you're going to work in. And you need the materials to sell that idea. All right. So you might have the idea, but then what happens next? What are these ideas? What are the materials that help you get your idea that's in your brain into the brains of these other people? So we're going to talk about all the materials for development. That's what we want to talk about now. We'll go into this in quite a bit of detail, hopefully, for the next 30 minutes. So if you're, super good at it, or have a good track record, or charming and have a good relationship with the decision maker, maybe you could just pitch them verbally. So here's my idea. You start with a little hand, like, okay, open on. So tell the story, and then they're really excited, and they're like, oh yeah, we're in. Here's a check, right? That would be awesome. But even verbally pitching the idea, you really need to have the basic understandings, because what if they ask you a question about it, or say, oh, so how are you going to tell this, or who's the main character again, or what's their motivation, whatever. You really, even if it's just verbal and you're never going to put it down on paper, or on the computer, we'll say, you still need to have a good understanding of it. So as an example, a narrative, like we just talked about, I think it was fear I was using the example of, a narrative woman, sorry, a short film about a young woman. It's a narrative, and she's has to overcome being paralyzed by fear to save her dog. So that sounds like a, we now know just by saying that it's a short film, it's a narrative, it's live action, it's we know who the lead is, we know her obstacle is, and maybe I'm really into dogs and I'm excited to see this or something. So really basic, super basic, but it gives you a little idea of what we're talking about. I'm just playing with my screen here, just give me 1 second. Yeah. So what are the materials you need? Title, of course. And a lot of people, it's okay to change your title. It's okay that it gets better. But I would work on this I would really consider this an important element. Short synopsis. I say short because, we'll say, well, this is what we're working on today, like a paragraph or less, a couple sentences. An outline, which is a little more detailed. We'll talk about that. The treatment, which is pretty basic, where you want, someone's like, yeah, I'm interested, I want to see more. Treatment. You're not going to write a full script if someone says, yeah, I want to see more, because it's a big commitment. A script, of course, which is really important. Sorry, budget, both expenses and financial scenario. Again, we'll cover all these. They're coming up, but I just want to line these things up. Things that you need, the materials for development. They kind of all lead into what I use a lot of, which is a one sheet, which is a piece of paper that you could hold in your hand, but now it's digital. So it's just two sides of 8.5 by 11, essentially. It's digital, so that even that's irrelevant, but it just summarizes all of this stuff for them. Why do you need these development materials? Well, you need to convey, again, the format that we talked about, the tone, because, if you watch a channel, they generally have a sense of style and tone, and they want it to fit with them. So they're not going to take something that's completely outside their style or tone. Those are things important. All right. Genre, again, I use that fairly loosely, but we kind of hopefully know what that means. If you have any questions, send me a chat along the way. And the costs, what's the budget? Because you could pitch something and they'll be like, yeah, it's great. And I actually just answered an email just minutes ago before I began this, when someone was getting an application together, and they're like, so I'm asking for 10,000. Should I put in 20,000? And I read her synopsis and treatment yesterday, and I was like, whoa, that's way too little. You have to ask for more than that. So, they have to line up, right? I'm just gonna, and then I think you have to think about, once again, the audience. Those are the reasons you want to develop materials, so that you are clear on all these things, and then you can convey that clarity to others, and basically so you can get the funding. But also, if you ever make it and deliver it, you want to be on the right road with them. It really gets problematic when two parties are working together on something and one has a different idea where it's going and the other doesn't. That's where it gets tricky. Okay. So I'm just gonna flick one more, and then and also you want to develop the materials, because then you start to realize what team you need, who you need to be involved, who needs to be involved to make this, and who is involved, and you want to get people on your team, right? So all of these materials help you. So yeah, I read that synopsis yesterday, and I was like, and I talked to this person about a project for quite a while. I was like, yeah, this is pretty good. Like, she's getting a really good handle on the idea, and it's a unique, exclusive access to an idea that could be good. So that's great. timeline as well. Like, yeah, I want to make this thing and it's going to take 6 years to make. And the broadcaster knows I need it in 6 months, not 6 years. So you need to be clear on you're developing this to understand the timeline. Okay. I'm going to quickly go to a question that someone had. My ideas tend to be for series. I tend to get stuck at the synopsis and outline. Is that supposed to be for the entire season or the pilot episode? A good question. Both. The answer is both. So if you are trying to do a series, then we call it a Bible. This is further along than this even, where you start to develop all of these things into one document. And that Bible tends to be the go-to for everyone. If a new director comes on to the episode, to like season 2, episode 3, it's a new director, they get to read the Bible and have a sense of tone and style and genre and cost and audience and format and all of those things. And so because they're all kind of in there. So if you're writing a synopsis, you want it for the whole thing, for the whole series, but then a pilot is going to have its own synopsis. It's going to be a specific synopsis. I watched a pilot for Ozark the other night. Jason Reitman directed it, did a really good job. It was a really good pilot to introduce so much information into a series. I'm really excited to watch more of it because of that. So I just thought, really good pilot. But the synopsis for the pilot would be different than the synopsis for the whole series. So that's something to think about. Okay, let's move on. So let's talk about titles briefly because, titles are pretty important. I think that they're overlooked by a lot of people. Was Dick Kirby, they had a doc at Sundance this year and it was untitled, I think, but then they eventually called it something like It Might Be Untitled, and then they finally came up with a name for it, I think, just by the time it screened. But yeah, that's not very provocative. So think of some titles. I have some good ones here. I love Breaking Away, that film, Oscar-winning film, and it's a great title because it's got that double entendre. There's 2 meanings to it, and it's great. Lost in Translation, I think that's a really strong title. I never forget that one. I forget Scarlett Johansson's name all the time for some reason, but never that title of that film. Pulp Fiction, and it's a really good title, I think. Dazed and Confused, Richard Linklater's early film, and I think that's a good title too. Natural Born Killers, that's provocative. I mean, Oliver Stone's a pretty provocative guy, but you want to watch that film when you read that, I think. And then I'll use this sample a few times along the way. There's nothing simpler and stronger than like a one-word title that it's hard to get them because most of them have been used already, but this is a good one, Jaws. So the title should, I think, we talked briefly about plot and theme, but they should try to touch on both of them. What is plot? What happens? Like what actually happens in the film? And I won't even try to, I don't want to stop too long to talk about these things, but yeah, without going, if you need me to go into more details, happy to, just send me a chat note. But plot, what happens, theme, more about what it's really about, more of the, I'll use an example. What's it called? And I forget the title of it. Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. What is the plot? It's a PowerPoint with a guy standing on stage explaining global warming, right? I mean, that's what the plot is. What is the theme? It is, I guess, almost similar, but the theme is more the exploration of humanity's impact on the planet and what the frig we're gonna do about it, right? So an example. And I use the words double entendre, but yeah, like if the plot can contain both, if the title can contain both the theme and the plot, then I think it's really starting to work. It's not easy, but again, you want to keep them short. You don't want a super long title, unless you're doing it on purpose. There's always a reason to break rules, but generally shorter is better, but if it can be provocative. Now, Michael Melski's film that closed the Charlottetown Film Festival last year, The Child Remains, I think it's a great title. Again, it's got 2 meanings. the child remains, you know, as in the child stays back, but also the remains of the child. So great example of a simple title, short, and you know, it did quite well. So and I think the title really helps with that. So good example. This is a short film that we made that it's a crazy little poster that someone did for us, but Gravesite. So it's just a short film, and that's the one I have queued up for later. But it's really, the title is, again, double meaning because they're at the grave. It is about grave robbing. They're there, but Gravesite, because that's the place, they called it Gravesite, but it's all about the guy and his eyeball. So we'll see more about that later if you want. But you know, so kind of a double, I guess. You know, so it's an example, not a great one, but there you go. So number one homework for this week, jot this down, everybody. Create a title for your project. If you, next week when I say how's it going, and I'll ask you what's your project title, then hopefully you'll have one. So that's what I would like. So yes, everyone. So that's homework number one. Maybe it's already done for you. That'd be awesome, wouldn't it? So let's talk about images, because I think that's also important. I want to make sure you guys are aware that we work in a visual medium. So a picture's worth, I don't know, what is it worth these days? More than 1,000 words, maybe, I don't know. When we're talking, remember that the people we're trying to convince to give us money, most of them, you know, some of them are bureaucrats, but a lot of them we're producers or we're filmmakers, and a lot of them work in this medium and understand the power of the image. And that's really the difference between us and, you know, a lot of the other arts forms out there. So we need to convey all those elements that we've already talked about, and hopefully within the image you can start to do that. So how can you do this? This is a question I get, which is totally legit. What image do I use on my one sheet when I haven't even made my film yet? It's just an idea. Well, I don't know, make one as my thing. Like, use the fact there's Photoshop, there are a million photos and images out there in the world, or you can literally just do it yourself. So my business partner, we're pitching something to CBC. She has the idea for the project, so she started to create an image. She sent me the image. I was like, yeah, that's pretty good, but what about this? We kind of laughed about that. So she changed it up and added to it. So she's literally taking pictures of her dog and a bunch of stuffies and putting it in the image. And we're trying to make one. We haven't made the film yet, but we'll have an image. Okay. So I'll give you an example. The Disappeared, which is the feature film that we produced a few years ago. I mean, I think this was the very first image that we had, which was, it's about 6 men lost at sea in 2 dories. And, you know, the script was written in a way, it was an open ending, like, did they make it or did they not? And so that's kind of the idea. And we actually found a couple of dories, we moved them, we put them in this flat water. You know, it's a little photoshopping, but we didn't put people in because we had no idea who we had as actors or anything. But even then, you know, it's just like an idea. And then we put text over it, of course. And then later we came up with, it was more, the story, it became, no problem, Renee. The story became more about the captain leading these people. And so we wanted to emphasize him. So we sort of got an image of some eyes, and then we sort of imposed them on a dory rowing. And we used that for a while too, and kind of, you know, chiseled it around the edges to make it a little more challenging. I don't know. And then we don't have time, but it was quite a few more permutations. And then eventually, you know, of course, we get the text on it. We have a tagline that will go into that stuff. But then, I mean, this is a very, very end of all of this. But we have an actual still image from the film that, let's see, I can do this. Just gonna, give me one second. That, you know, so these guys, this is the actual image, and we're able, you know, the actual actors in the film, So we were able to put that in. You know, we have a title, we have a tagline, that's fine. But you know, all of this other stuff up here is all just extra that came later, you know, for marketing purposes and such. And you know, you have the laurels and all of that. So all of that's great. But that really is, you know, that's the end. But at one point, it was just really just this part once we had this image. So you can forget about all the fluff and stuff. But at least we found an image, and then we had one. We have a few others too, but that became our sort of poster and stuff. So I just wanted to point that out. So as an example, okay, let's see. Next, here's another one sheet, as we'll call it. And I do have some earlier versions, and then sort of became an example. But it's just like, you know, again, a title. And the title of the film is different now. Now that it's done, it's a different title. But that was our title for many years. And, you know, it was still, but we had an image. And we had a pretty strong image. And so that image really stuck with the film throughout. You know, we had shot footage and everything, but and then we had a tagline and such. So that's an example again where an image can really be useful. One thing I mentioned about that is we had once this was getting made, we even had a magazine that covered this particular disability, like a magazine that focused on disabilities, asked if they could put this on the cover of their magazine and then do a little article because they thought the image was so great. So valuable to have an image, you know. And as you guys know, when you're in a film festival, and especially if you make shorts, they might pick one short for the image instead of the other 5, and they'll pick the strongest image. So once again, image super powerful. So I encourage you to find, create, make, imagine, whatever. This is homework number 2, an image for your project. All set, but start thinking about that and try and get something. Your internet is unstable. Yeah, try and get something working for that. Okay. So let me know once again if I'm breaking up or if we're having problems, but just had a warning that might happen. But moving on, let's talk about synopsis. What's a synopsis, guys? Okay. We'll just go with the short synopsis, 50 words or less. Seems fair. Again, the story structure. What happens in the story? Who's the protagonist? That's useful. You know, it's hard to make a project about fear. If I said the project's about fear, or what was the other one? Boredom, without zooming in on, especially if it's a narrative, zooming in on a particular person that's going to be that, to expound on that theme. What's the conflict in the story? Even drama, documentary, you still need some sort of tension, we'll call it, within the story. So try and get that in your synopsis. Again, talk about the genre. You know, it's a comedy. It's a romantic comedy. It's a what's the one? It's a bromance. You know, there's all kinds of subgenres within comedy, obviously. So is it or is it a, what's the one? It's a tragedy or something, like half trag, half comedy. Anyway, it's endless, but just understand those. Again, try to get the tone right. Try to, in the synopsis, and any marketable elements. So what's marketable elements? Like, you know, again, if Brad Pitt was your cousin and he said he'd do the voiceover for you, then you want to include that in your synopsis. I mean, that might be, maybe it's a little early in the materials to include it, but don't forget. So, but any marketable elements, it's great to slip that in. For instance, yeah, the project I was talking with the woman yesterday, she got Maureen McCabe, a musician, a quite well-known artist, who's sort of tangentially involved in the project, and she contacted them and asked for songs and got rights for 3 songs. I'm like, you've got to include that early on in your materials to make sure, because that's a great marketable element, as an example. So yeah, synopsis. We want to write down the basic idea for your project in 1 or 2 sentences. That's the synopsis, pretty basic. Include the lead character, who it's about, what they want, what they're forced to do, you know, we call them obstacles, what happens, you know, it's just basic writing, but producers have to write sometimes as well. Here's a couple of examples of some nice little synopsis. When a giant great white shark begins to menace the small island community of Amity, a police chief, a marine scientist, and a grizzled fisherman set out to stop it. You know, that's a pretty decent synopsis. It's a sentence, but you get an idea. You get an idea of the tone and the genre, I think. An aging patriarch of an organized crime dynasty transfers control to his clandestine empire to his reluctant son. So good. And then here's another one. During the ongoing Vietnam War, Captain Willard is sent on a dangerous mission into Cambodia to assassinate a renegade Green Beret who has set himself up as God among the local tribe. Now like those are good synopses. I mean, sure, there's professionals writing this stuff, and they've probably been, you know, again, I have synopses that have evolved from beginning to even when it's out on the festival circuit to when it's on TV or whatever, you're still changing the synopsis. But yeah, something like that. Write something like that. That's your homework too. Okay, so we've got 3 things now. Find an image, get a title, and write a synopsis for your project. Now, maybe you've got them all done already. Well, look at them and see if you can make them better, okay? That's important. Keep working on those elements. Log line. Here's another thing. What's a log line? You know, it's a short synopsis, we'll say. Here's a log line. A depressed child psychologist tries to help a boy who's tormented by a ghost, only to find out that he's a ghost himself. You know, M. Night made millions of dollars on his like smart little log lines and turned them into a full career at Disney. Yeah, I would say a log line is just a shorter version than a synopsis. That's all. So sometimes you hear them both. Again, these are just my opinions. Who knows? So yeah, that's your homework synopsis. You don't have to worry about the log line. You could call it that. It doesn't matter. Just something that describes your project. Tagline, I think, is different. A tagline is a shorter thing. It's a one-liner. It really is. It's that short, crisp thing. You don't have to get too involved in all that other stuff that I talked about. It's really something for, you know, does TV Guide exist digitally still? It's really something that is supposed to get people like, yeah, I want to watch that. If they don't watch the trailer, they just look at the poster. You need them to want to watch. You need them to want to go to the trailer. You need to push people further. So you want something for the poster. So Jaws, that we read the synopsis. That's you know, pretty descriptive of the plot, but the tagline is, you'll never go in the water again. You know, throw that on with a big set of teeth and the jaws coming at the water at you, and you've got a pretty provocative image, right? So that's what you want, something provocative, something catchy, something makes the audience want to see it, right? That's what you want. So more homework. A tagline. So write a tagline for your project. That's something that you can work on as well. Again, it's not the same as a synopsis. You can really go off to another direction, but just try and do that. So is everyone cool with all that homework? It's going to lead us somewhere. Trust me. And again, maybe you've got it all done. So let's go to the bigger stuff, the stuff that takes a little more time, a little more commitment. Maybe you've already got, I would say if you've got all those other elements, you might have enough to pitch the project, or we say elevator pitch it to someone so that they can say, yeah, I'm interested, show me more. You might need more. Certainly some of the applications and online portals require more elements, but we'll talk about some of those now. An outline. An outline is more expansive than a synopsis. A page feels like, you know, you could say, well, that's just a long synopsis. That's totally fine. But I would start calling that an outline. It should cover the plot, really what happens. The outline, you know, you can start to include the audience and those other elements. But really, if it's a good outline will sort of cover what's happening. it's useful for busy decision makers that don't have time to read a script. Or again, even for you, if you give them an outline and a synopsis and a title and a tagline and a picture and an image, whatever, that should be enough for them to say, yes, I want more. And ideally, they'll be like, yes, I want more, and I'll give you this amount of money to give more. I'll use the NFB as an example. The National Film Board has kind of 3 levels of development. You go in, you pitch them up to this level. Here's an outline, here's a title, here's a synopsis, and they can give you around up to $5,000 to do what's called an investigate. Yeah, I love that idea. Now here's $5,000. Go back and do some research, and then come back to me with the next level, which we'll talk to. Once you come back to them, and then they all meet and they're like, yeah, let's move this project forward. I've got all these new elements. Let's go into development. And then you develop much more. And then after that stage, you go back to the NFB and they're like, yes, we're in, let's produce it. So that's what happens. That's what happens with the NFB at those sort of development level. They have another program called FAPS, which we'll talk about next week briefly. Okay, so the next level after outline is a treatment. What's a treatment? Well, it is longer than the outline. I've written longer than 20-page treatments, but I would say 20 is plenty. If you can't sort of describe what happens in, well, you know, again, even if it, going back to Shannon's question, even if it was a series, this would be the treatment for the pilot, right? You would take an episode and write a detailed treatment for it. It'd be weird to write a treatment for the whole arc of a season. Typically, you would outline that via each episode. In this episode, this happens, this episode, this happens, this episode, all the way. And then if you read all that, you're like, now I have an arc for a season. But we're talking about a treatment here. We're talking about a treatment for like a pilot or a script. So that is the detail of the plot. That's what you're lining up there. Detail of the plot. What happens from start to finish. Literally, how you open, when it opens, the alarm clock goes off, you know, sun rises, whatever, you know, fade from black, all the way to the end. That is a good treatment. And that can be for documentary or for drama. For documentary, that pretty much is the end of the written materials until you go to produce. But in narrative, of course, the next stage would be a script. Right? So a treatment. So you went from synopsis, logline, synopsis, outline, treatment, and then script would be the next thing, right? So you don't really want to go write a script unless you're doing a spec script. You don't want to write a script if you don't have a producer involved or you don't have some money involved. But the script really is we would say that is eventually the template for the show that you're making. Again, that's not how it ends up typically, but because things get cut and things get added and there's rewrites and polishes and all kinds of changes, but you write a script, and that really, a script is the architectural information that ultimately is the full detail of the thing that you're going to make. The screenplay, we'll say. So there is a standard format for that. Doesn't mean you can't break it, but you should know it. That's pretty simple. You should have the date, the draft, the writer, and the contact info on what we would call the title page. Now, remember that each format, when I say there's a standard format, I've seen people I've read, they've given me script for a 1-hour drama, but it's laid out like a feature, or it's a sitcom, but it's laid out like a 1-hour drama. So it's not that hard to figure. I mean, literally just go Google one of them and then make sure that there's format is similar. A lot of the obviously softwares have this laid out for you, but you as the producer don't have to worry too much about this. But just remember, you don't want to be submitting a sitcom that's not in the format of a sitcom. And especially if whoever you're submitting it to, check what their sitcom formats are and make sure it's similar. Pretty simple, because of course they all have different layouts. Like maybe there's a an intro, a cold open, maybe there's ads, maybe there aren't ads, right? And you have to write differently if that's the case. If it's a 1 hour without ads, it's written differently as than a 1 hour with ads. So because with ads means you have to like leave a tease and then come back off the top and all of these different things. So just remember that that exists. So don't forget. And you know, we don't have to, this isn't screenwriting, so we'll skip through that. But again, if you have any questions, feel free. Budget, that's an important element because you could write a sweet little outline, tag, cover page, one sheet, whatever, send it to them. But if they don't know how much money you want from them, how much are they going to know they have to give you, or if you're in the ballpark that what they're interested in. So remember, there's two sides. We'll go through this in more detail in the future next week, but there's two sides to a budget. You need both of them, right? One of them being the expenses. Most people think when there's a budget, that's all they think about, the expense side, where the money goes, where the money gets spent. But of course, there's also the other side, and that's the revenues, the financial scenarios, the FS, we would call it. So you need to include both of those, and remember that they both at the bottom need to be equal, because if you send in an application to Arts PEI, that's what's called, and you were trying to do a short music video art piece and you want $2,000 from them, and your total budget is $5,000, and in your financial scenario you have 3,000 from the band and 2,000 from someone else, and then you're asking for 2,000 from them. I just threw a bunch of numbers at you, but why would they give you money when your budget, your finances add up to $7,000 and your budget adds up to $5,000? You don't need the 2,000 from them, so why would they give it to you? And in fact, often they can't even give it to you because you didn't ask, because you're not showing a need. So that's a kind of a basic thing. Just make sure that the expenses equal the finances. So if you put in a bunch of money on one side, it needs to match the amount that you're spending. Just basic budgeting. We could go into more details. Again, send me some emails or in the chat if you have any questions about this stuff. One last point. Contingency, that is the amount of money that you didn't think about. You forgot that there was extra gas. You didn't realize that someone would overspend on this or on that. There's always going to be money spent beyond what you budget for, and we call that a contingency. So make sure you include that line in your expenses. There are rare circumstances when, just like I explained earlier, where an organization will look at it and say, well, we can't give you money for contingency because that's not money you've allocated to spend. That's pretty weird, but it happened to me once recently where Canadian Heritage said through this program, they said, well, we'll give you all the money except the contingency, which essentially meant because I put contingency in, I didn't have the same amount requested and the same amount spent. So they just couldn't give me that amount. Pretty odd. But anyway, include contingency. That's budget. We'll take a closer look at it next week. Really quick version. Now, remember I mentioned audience. Don't forget them. Who is your target audience? Okay, I'm making a comedy. It's a rom-com. It's a teen rom-com. You know, and so who's my audience? It would be weird if you said I'm writing a teen rom-com and my audience is 60 to 75-year-old seniors. You know, that just doesn't make sense, right? So make sure that the audience makes sense. And the narrower your demographics can be, the more confidence we have that you know what you're talking about. I mean, it can't be super narrow, like it's just for grandmas that own a Chihuahua that live in Kelowna. That doesn't make sense. But, you know, if it's about Chihuahuas, then you can say one of my demographics is Chihuahua lovers. The other demographic is it's got 7 grandmas in it, so it's about seniors, right? So think about that. Just narrow the demographics, and I feel like a good pitch has 3 demographics picked out, 3 target groups. And I'll use the example. I'll have an example coming up, but we hear this in Hollywood, the 4-quadrant film. And what they mean by that, I just want to just briefly point out that they have 4 groups in mind, and the more groups you can hit with your project, with your idea, the more likely they'll succeed, or more importantly, less likely they'll lose their job with a failure. So they're like, okay, we're hitting them, we're hitting them, we're hitting them and them, and we got it all. It's a 4-quadrant. Wow, this is a home run. We definitely got to make this film, Star Wars, right? You could see as an example. And when they make the film, they consider all of these demographics to make sure they're hitting them all. Right. Oh man, we need a stronger female character so that we can, a young, stronger female character so that we hit the under 25 females. So we're going to make that person the lead. You know, like it's almost reverse engineering. But this, I just want to throw that at you. We'll go back to The Disappeared as an example. Just doing a time check. It's 2 o'clock already. It's after 2, so I'm almost through this section. But The Disappeared as an example. Target group 1. We had anyone with this stuff. It took us a while to come up with this, but anyone that's kind of lived by the sea or been touched by the sea. People have been on boats, and when you're on a boat and you're out and you don't see land, it just really has an impact on you. And this was a target group for us. Another one would be those who have almost died or who have experienced loss. That would be because of the existential element of the film. We thought, okay, there's a target group. And then a third one was because of the way we shot the film, it was a pretty, art house film, really. So those would be cinephiles. Make sense? So that's an example. So we have 3 target groups, and then that sounds like, instead of just saying it's for everyone, or what's your audience, what's your demographic? Oh, 18 to 97, you've got to really, the wider it is, the less it seems you've cared about that work. Okay. And then you can ask yourself, okay, here's my target audiences. It's just about Chihuahua grandmas that live in Kelowna. Maybe I shouldn't make that film, right? But if you do find that you've got some good target audience, then go for it. And then maybe you'll find some funding to do that. So next up, a bunch of legal stuff. You guys ready? Shake it out, because it's a lot of stuff to cover. But so I'm not a lawyer. If you're executing agreements or contracts, I advise talking to an entertainment lawyer. There's a few of them in Atlantic Canada, and they're all expensive. I can give you details if you need them. Producer's job, briefly, remember. Oops, I went 2 there. Remember that you're the person responsible for turning the creative idea into a marketable concept, right? You also initiate, coordinate, supervise, and manage the creation of the production. That's your job, really. Remember from last week, you secure the rights to the project. That's key here. And you set the budgets and secure the funds for the project. You're also in charge of financing and the logistics, which is generally all of the above, and a lot more, of course, but that's remember that. So how do you make money on the project? You secure the intellectual property to an idea. We talked about maybe it's your idea, but the company still has to secure that. But certainly we're going to now talk about other ideas and where you get them. And then you exploit it. That's what your job. It sounds kind of reductive, I suppose, but that's your job. You get the material, you get the ideas, you get the concepts, and then you own them, or get the rights to own them or option them, and then try to make money off of them. What is intellectual property? Let's talk a bit briefly about that. It's not just used in filmmaking. There's obviously other types of intellectual property. IP is, it's essentially intellectual property protection isn't as simple, sorry, I'm just going to read this, isn't as simple as declaring ownership of a particular product or asset. You just can't say, it's mine, I own it, plant a flag on it and say it's mine. No, in most countries, because we use the countries and sometimes even states, but typically just countries, there are 4 primary types of IP. And they are patents, which you've probably heard of, trademarks, another element, copyrights, and trademarks. Sorry, and that's also, what was the secret? What's there's 4, and you can add it, type it if you want. Trade secrets. That's right. Trade secrets is supposed to say. That's funny. So patents used to protect inventive ideas or processes. Those are patents. If you get a patent on how to make whiteout, for example, The person who patented whiteout made millions of dollars. Another thing like trademarks, so it more protects words, phrases, even colors, believe it or not, smells, schemes. So trademarks are more specific to like individual things. And then copyright, remember, this is key. It doesn't protect an idea, but rather the manner in which that idea is expressed. And we call that authorship. So original works of authorship. So again, you could say I'm writing a book called Jaws, and it's all the words that you use to write a book called Jaws that it can be copywritten, not the concept of a scary movie about sharks, right? Or even the title. But you might be able to trademark a specific logo in the design of Jaws so that other people couldn't use it, like the logo for Disney, for example. You would trademark that. But copyright is what we're really talking about here. So it's written works. It could be art, it could be music, architectural drawings, even programming code, right? Like that's all stuff that's written, and it's an expression of authorship. And then again, trade secrets, which is the fourth version, which is proprietary procedures or systems or formulas, that stuff. And an example might be like, how do they make the special sauce on a Big Mac, and that's a trade secret that they would patent or trademark or own. But a trade secret is another thing that you can own. So which one do we care about? Hands up. Copyright, of course. So that's the thing that we're looking at here, copyright. And copyright is protecting the creators or owners of rights by preventing others from using them without your permission. So really, it's like, you wrote a script, other people saw it and they liked it and they made a movie about that. Well, they're not allowed to do that, and you're protecting the rights to that. So you can now copyright and rights, we'll just say rights in general, go a long way. So there's a long list of credits to see, and the army of people involved in making something. So there's a lot of money involved. It's a very complex, collaborative endeavor that gives rise to many different layers of rights. So not just copyright, but there's other rights to the screenplay, rights to the music, rights to the direction, even that, the performances, all of these have rights, and your job is to license all of those rights, believe it or not, or have rights to use all of those rights. The rights need to be licensed, transferred, and documented. That's another thing. So this would then, if you get all of those rights, then it allows the producer to what? Claim ownership of the film, all right? That's important. It's my film because I have the rights to the script and to all of those. I can then go out and raise money to make the film because I own the rights, and they will give me the money because someone else isn't going to make that film. And I can license the distribution rights, and we can, to sales agents, distributors, and even what we call pre-sale based on the rights that I own, to go off and make the most amount of money to the most amount of people. So there are a lot of agreements that are necessary that you want to secure, okay? So producers negotiate multiple amounts, lots of agreements, and there's a lot of contributors, of course. If you think, again, that long list of credits, all those people contributed to your film if you're the producer, and you need to kind of secure those agreements along the way. You want to define how the IP rights arising from the property will be used and remunerated. So remunerated meaning how you're going to pay people accordingly. So, there are some people that whenever a film gets shown and money is exchanged, they get a little piece of that. They get a little piece of the movie because you have a contract or an agreement with them that says they get a bit of that money that you make. So that can get pretty complicated. We call it the back end or points. The idea of, how many points do you have on that film? I'm the director, so I negotiated 5 points, which is 5% of the back end, which is the money that comes after the film is made. So there's a lot of technical stuff, but we won't go into those in details. But all of this is underpinned by copyright law and contract law. And there's a long history of legal documents. And again, they're not that difficult. I write contracts like this, but are all based on other templates that I've sort of adjusted. So again, not as a lawyer, but just as someone doing this stuff, you can figure it out and save yourself a lot of money. And all of these pieces of paper come together in the end to create what we call a chain of title. And that's the documents that are in a folder, we'll say, or a digital folder, that represent all the agreements and all the contracts that you've signed along the way to give you those rights to exploit that project. Chain of title, what is it? Again, it just shows that you own the rights to the property and no one else does, and that's important. And it doesn't mean you can't get sued. It doesn't mean someone could take offense to what you did or say, hey, they stole my idea. I told them that 10 years ago. But all of these documents give you more proof and more strength that you would be able to defeat that in the court of law. So you're just trying to protect yourself and the funders and financiers so that you can move on. So these documents might include an option agreement. We're going to talk about that, an option agreement. We're going to talk about a writer's agreement, and we're going to dabble a bit into, well, probably not much, into a researcher's agreement and other producers. There might be co-producers. You might not be doing this alone, so you have to have an agreement between the 2 or 4 or 10 of you on who gets what and how that's controlled, and even executive producer agreements. Today I was asked to talk to an executive producer and try and get him on our project, so I have to negotiate an executive producer agreement. So there's lots of different agreements. Let's talk about the option agreement. Now, one thing to remember that there's a nice little binder, we call it a handbook that Telefilm puts out. It's called the Producer's Handbook, and it's available online. And it has some of these, it sort of goes through all this stuff in detail, and it actually shows you some samples of things. And I originally had option and writer agreement as one. They were both kind of within one document. And that can be done if, of course, the person that you're optioning the rights to the idea is also the person writing it. But if they're not, then you have to separate those. So an option agreement, it details the rights purchase agreement. It helps avoid unforeseen legal problems, just like all of these other things. It clarifies that you are getting the rights to the idea. So we'll say, for example, that John Kimmel has an idea, and he talked to me about it, and I said, that's a great idea. I'd like to option that idea from you. And he's like, okay, I'll option it to you for this amount of money, and I'm going to, but I also want to be the writer, and I want to be the director. And we negotiate, like, well, I don't want you to direct it. I have this perfect person who can direct it, but you can write it. And that way they're going to get some more money down the road too. But this doesn't guarantee, again, these documents never guarantee, like I said, that you're not going to be sued or that's going to be a problem or someone's going to try and steal your idea, but they just help guarantee, they help build confidence that it won't happen. So you might not need an option agreement if, for example, John's pitch was, it's about a ship that hits an iceberg and sinks in the Atlantic Ocean, and it was called the Titanic. And I have this really cool idea for it, and I don't really even listen to his idea, his specific authorship on it, but he wants me to option the idea of Titanic. Well, it's a pretty well-known story. There's so many versions out there. I don't think I need to talk to John and pay him the money to option his idea, because I just want to make another project on the Titanic, because it's, say, the 100th anniversary. I think, oh, it's perfect. There's people are going to be wanting a show on the Titanic. I'll just do a different one, but I don't want John's. So yeah, you don't need an option agreement, because you're not going to be using his specific material. Also, maybe there's an example where your story is original and not based on like the article. So for instance, there might be an article in a magazine about a particular thing, and you're like, oh, that's a cool idea. I don't want to option that article in the magazine because I don't want to pay for it, but I want to make a story about that. Well, that would work if that idea was already generally out there. But if this is a very unique story about a very unique person and a very unique thing, we'll use the Monopoly game at McDonald's. It was an article about that. And then that article I mean, the people that had been researching this documentary for years before the article came out. But when the article came out, it was pretty detailed. And so I think they optioned it from the people, they just to secure the rights, even though they were already making that documentary. Anyway, it's about McDonald's, and that there was some people that were like kind of basically stealing the monopoly money contest. Anyway, move on. So also, let me go back just for a second. So maybe your idea is original and therefore you're not using others, so you might not need an option agreement, but there might be reasons you want the option agreement. And this again would be an example like when I used the Monopoly money game, was that just the funders and everyone's going to feel better if you've optioned it, and that kind of means they're not going to sue you because it's close. But also it might scare off competition where like, yeah, we optioned that article. And, or if someone called them up and say, can we option that story from you? And they say, well, someone already did, they have the exclusive rights to this article. Then that's going to scare off people too. I'll give you a quick anecdote. I know we're going to run out of time, but I read a graphic novel. I thought it was great. I contacted the publisher because I knew them. And then they said the author had already optioned this book to a company in Winnipeg to make a documentary about it. And I was like, okay. And then 2 years go by, and I was like, I haven't seen that documentary. So I contacted him, and he's like, I don't know, I never did see it either. So he gave me the writer, the person who created it, gave me her email. I wrote to her, and she said, no, a bunch of people did talk to me, but I never did option it. And I was like, oh man, we should talk about that. So then I was flying to Montreal, I met with her, and then we talked about the book, and then now we're working together on that project. And instead of optioning it from her, we're becoming co-partners in it and co-producers to try and make that documentary. So just a quick example. So it does scare off competition when someone says, oh, it's already optioned, then you kind of go away. And I went away for 2 years on it, but now I'm back. And again, another example, you might want strategic partnerships. So again, if you have optioned something, you're more likely to get other people involved and come on board with you because you have the rights to something. So let's talk about options again, an option agreement. It's the rights to take the idea or story and try to make a film about it. Now, there's a period to how long this is. It removes the competition because you're going to say, hopefully, you're getting an exclusive right to option it. So if your right says you're just optioning it and you don't have an exclusive right to this project, I wouldn't pay more than $1 for that option, because someone else could come along and option it too. They could sell their idea or their book to 10 different people if it's not exclusive. And then whoever gets made first wins. That's not very helpful. An option agreement should have exclusivity. So you say, for the next 2 years, I'm optioning your story so that I can try to make it into a movie. After that 2 years, of course, after that period of time, it's over, and then you lose the option. But typically you might say in your agreement, I want it for 2 years. Typically it would be 2 years, and then option to renew it for 2 more years. Because if they're working with you and they've seen that you've been working hard and trying to get it made, and maybe it's almost made, well, then they'll option it another 2 years for you. And again, you typically put in how much money that might be for both times. Now, you need to minimally option it for at least $1. Your agreement should say $1, and you don't even have to exchange that dollar. But if you say you did an option for $0, then it won't hold up, but $1 minimum. So as an example, the period of time that you might want to option. Some people want to option like, if you're talking to someone who's worth a lot, or they think they have a hot story, they're not going to give you much time to option it, because you could just sit on it for 23 months and then just work on it in the last month of your 2-year agreement. They're not going to be very happy with that. You paid them some money, $1 or more, and you're trying to get that turned into something. So be careful of that. Now, a current item like, a tragic accident that they're going to turn it into a movie right away, or it won't be worth anything in a while, they're going to give you a shorter option period. But maybe it's a book that's been out there for years and no one's optioned it. Well, maybe they'll give it to you, and they're in no rush. So I just wanted to give you an example of that. Now, after that option period, say you option something from John, I optioned his Titanic story for 2 years. And at the end of that 2 years, If we don't renew that option, if he doesn't want it to renew and I don't want it to renew, or neither of us or one of us, depending on what's in the contract, it would revert back to that person. So John would get the rights to that. And even if I paid him $1,000 to try and turn it into a movie over 2 years and I don't, then it reverts back to him and he gets to sell it to someone else again. Okay, that's important. So more on the option agreement. We're trying to get through this stuff. To secure the rights to use the material before going forward, you don't want to start developing an idea if you don't have the option agreement already, because you're wasting your development time. So be careful about that. They typically state that the owner of the underlying work has agreed to grant the producer, again, for a specific period, the right to produce a film. Now, this is the transfer of the rights. They're going to give you the rights for a period of time. And hopefully you're going to have exclusivity on those rights, meaning someone else can't come to them and say, I really like that story you have, that article you wrote, John, about the Titanic. Can I option it? And they're like, yeah, sure, no problem. Well, then you're going to have to sue them because he can't do that because you have an exclusive right with them. Okay. So if the film gets made, so what if you actually go and make the film, meaning that you exercise the option, I've exercised the option and I've made the film, then the copyright owner, the person that you paid, John, has agreed for a fee for the ongoing right to use the work. So not only do you pay them, $1 or $1,000 or whatever to option the right for those 2-year period. Once you go to film, there should be something in it that says, and if we make it into a film, I'll give you an extra $5,000 because I'm going to get paid $100,000 to make this. So you should get some of it too. That seems fair, right? The rights purchase agreements usually negotiate at the same time as outlining the terms of, securing the rights for the screenplay, the TV rights, or the rights to release, anything. So, you're going to sit down and make sure that you've written out, if you are turning it into a film, wow, that's amazing. He's going to get some money for that. But maybe John wants some money in case I get a bunch of, options to turn into a play on Broadway. Or what if I get to make a TV series out of it or whatever. So he's going to be smart and say, well, I'm optioning it to you. And if you make it into a film, I'll get this. But what if you make it into this, 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 and this? What's my share? So those are elements of that contract. It can get pretty complicated, as you can see. Producers seek to acquire as many rights as possible, right? So on my side, John might be asking for all this, but I want to have all of those rights myself, obviously. The original copyright owner will try to get as many as they want, but I want a bunch of things. For example, publication rights. Like what if, maybe I can sell the screenplay. Maybe I can sell stage rights to do a play. That would be pretty cool. Or radio play, or podcasts now. Like what if you could turn it into something like that? And you rights to the characters. What if you're going to do a spin-off because there's some really provocative characters in that article that he wrote, and then they have the spin-off, right? What about merchandising? It can get pretty crazy. Quickly, the Star Wars example, as you guys probably all know, when George Lucas was negotiating back at the time, he said, yeah, I'll give you all of those rights, but I want merchandising. And at the time, merchandising was nothing. But then Star Wars blew up. It got so big, and he got to sell all those toys and make deals with Lego and all that stuff. And it was millions and millions and millions of dollars that he made just because he made that one little addition to his contract that said, I want merchandising. And they gave it to him. And that was huge. It literally changed all of filmmaking, just that one little piece of that contract. Okay, what about life rights? What are those? Life rights are, if John wrote an article about someone that the last survivor of the Titanic lives in, Cornwall, PEI, and it's an article about them. Well, if you're going to make a movie about that, you might need the rights of that person. So you have to go to that person and get life rights. Gets more complicated if they're dead and it's in their family, or it's bigger than that. But you might need life rights, so it's something else. What about moral rights? I'm not even going to get into that. It's too confusing. So moving on to the script. You might need to get an agreement for the script, because it could be a new work, right? It could just be someone could write a spec script out of nowhere. Just think of an idea and write something. Or it could be based on an existing work, like a novel or a book or whatever. Those are two of the same things. Sorry. So for existing works, you know, obviously a novel, a play, comic book, we talked about all these things, short story, it could be an article, it could be an event, like sadly a bus crashing and people perishing. So the script itself is always considered an original creation because it literally is an expression of some authorship. So even if it's based on an idea, someone is turning that into a document, a script, and that you also need to own the rights to, right? So we typically would hire a writer to create that script, but we might also hire the writer. Again, it could be you, but you still need to write that through. Yes, there are templates for this. So without getting too lost in this, what I suggest that everyone does if they need any of these documents is they go to Telefilm and they look under Telefilm for the producer's handbook. And in that handbook, you will find examples of these. So the producer hires the writer who can write the script, obviously, but they can write that outline for you, the treatment, the first draft of the script, subsequent drafts, rewrites and polishes. All of these could be, you could hire one writer to do all of these. As in Hollywood, they often hire a writer and they don't like it, they fire them and hire another writer, and then they hire another writer, and then by that time there's 10 writers, and then they have to figure out who gets the credit. But this is what happens. So you need to, in order to hire a writer, you need to employ them to write this so that you own it. Now, if you're buying a script from someone, you're optioning that script if they've already written it on spec, right? Oh, thanks, Renee. There it is in the chat. It's the producer's handbook. It's a little old now, but still good. Okay, so the writer's agreement, you need a contract with the writer. You would want to include the fee as an example, how much you're going to pay them, the deliverables, like what you expect of them, first draft, whatever, that's a deliverable. The timeline, I would like that in the next 3 months. The credit that they would get in the end. So they would get written by, or maybe not, depending. Other agreements that you might need. Man, you might need an agreement with the director and the cast and the crew and clearances, like for stuff that's in the film. So all of these things you might need agreements for. We don't want to go into too many of them in too much detail because I think your brains will collapse at this point. But essentially, what I'm talking about is that chain of title, and you have a bunch of documents. Let's talk about the director's agreement briefly. So because, you know, most of you guys are in that world where you're probably going to have a director, it's either you or someone, and that there's, again, with the director, just like the writer, there's several elements. You'd want to talk about how much they're going to get paid, even if you're directing it and the producing company is going to get you to direct it. What credit you get, where that credit even goes in the credit line, all that stuff. Do you get final cut? Does the director get final cut, or do the producers get final cut? And final cut meaning that once the project is done and delivered, the project that the director is done with might get handed over to you, and then you, if you have final cut, get to change it because you didn't quite like that last scene or whatever. Or they have final cut, meaning they get to put that out. So be aware of who gets that. And then there's other deliverables, like how far along is the director required? Do they just wrap production and then they're gone? Do they have to deliver a first assembly with the editor? Do they have to deliver a first draft? Which draft, you know? And then maybe they're there all the way till it's completed. So these are things you have to think about. Also, what other obligations might you want the director to do? For instance, do they have to help you promote the film? Do they go to festivals? What if the film gets into a festival? Who gets to go? Does the producer go? Or does the director go? Or do you both go? And who pays for that? All that stuff you want to work out. Kind of a little intimidating and a lot of work, but these sorts of things you can find in the handbook as well. Securing funds. So IP supports IP rights. If you have a nice clear chain of title with all these documents, that can be valuable. If you don't have any of them, or if you pretend you have them, or if they're kind of a mess, then you can be getting yourself into trouble if you're moving along as a producer with a project and yet you don't actually have the rights. So there was a story where I was working with someone, and the option agreement ran its course. It was 2 years plus 2 years, and then it had another option of plus 2 years. Anyway, the director and I got, as I was a producer, they were the director, and I had notified them that I wanted to continue that, but then our relationship had fallen apart. So it just got really messy in the end. And then we just decided, well, let's just split up because it got a little complicated and messy. So, having clear chain of title documentations that everyone sees and everyone can sort of agree to doesn't even mean at the end that troubles won't happen, but it helps eliminate those troubles. It helps reduce the chance of them happening. So, without the clear chain of title, it's going to be harder for you to sell the film, and maybe even impossible, because people will ask for those chain of title documentations. And if they're not clear, or if there's ambiguity, or if it's, I optioned something from a writer recently, and he had worked with another producer briefly, and I said, I need proof that I have clear chain of title. And he said, I got him to write it into the agreement. So if that producer comes back and says, you owe me $5,000 or whatever, it's up to the writer to pay that, not me. So it's important to keep that stuff clear. Having an agreement with an established screenwriter, and in that case it was an established screenwriter, or an actor or a director, any of those, we'll call them attachments, they can have a significant advantage to you. If you option a hot book, if you were, and everyone wanted it, it's going to get made, and you're the producer that's going to make it. So you just, or if it's a really hot director or an actor or whatever, like, these rights that you get can be very valuable. So just consider that, remember that. And I use the term attachment because if you've attached a director to direct your film, and that director is, got heat, we'll say, like they're up and coming, but everyone wants to work with them, then it's way easier for you, for sure. Okay, so just remember that. So attaching the right people, but they're not attached if you don't have an agreement with them. And that, that happens to actors always. We always talk about there's a bunch of terms, pay to play, and a bunch of different terms for actors, but securing actors to be in your film is, that means people can have confidence that the film is going to be viable and make money, and that happens a lot. So getting all of these agreements in place is super important. We got 15 minutes left. I'm going to take a quick breath here, slow down for a second. We're almost through. The first half was definitely more on the creative side. This is more paperwork side. But I just want to talk briefly about IP rights, making sure, again, that you understand them, right? So they do shape each stage of the filmmaker's journey from the beginning to the end. If you don't own them, they're a problem. And there's all kinds of rights within the film, of course. If you own those rights, it does help attract funds, and that can be important. We talked about development last week. Even if at the development stage, if you want to get a script written and you want someone to give you the money for it, you kind of have to have the option. You have to have optioned the rights and have those agreements in place in order to make that happen. Telefilm will not give you money until you have all those agreements and have given them copies. So they have to be executed agreements. And so they know that this stuff happens, and people sort of have an agreement with someone, and then that sort of goes sour, and then they sort of lose that, and it can be a problem. Right? But remember that even beyond that, it enables the directors, the screenwriters, the actors, all the technicians and artists involved. This is how they make a living, is based on you safely and securing the rights to the medium, or the rights to the contracts, to all of those people that are going to work, and making sure that that's going to work and trouble doesn't happen. If someone gets sued, it just stops all the money from flowing, right? It also even spurs the technological innovations and pushes the boundaries, because like we talked about, you can trademark and use copyright for software development. Like even as you guys know, in Prince Edward Island, the idea of creating a piece of software that can help filmmaking if done right, can turn into millions of dollars and is super important. So these are the sorts of things that are important to remember when we're talking about intellectual property rights. Copyright. So quite simple. The idea of copyright can be, I mean, I talked about all that other stuff, but just the idea of copyright doesn't have to be that complicated. You can produce a minimally creative, so I'm going to read this because I'm getting tired. Produce a minimally creative original work of authorship and fix a record to your creation in some way. So imagine you just sit down and you write a script. I wrote a short script last night, or I wrote a feature over the last couple of months. Great. So how are you going to keep copyright for that? How do you start that chain of title? Well, you can literally write it down on a piece of paper and put it in the mail and mail it to yourself. Take that script, stick it in the mail and mail it to yourself and get it post-dated. That's an simple, cheap example of copywriting something. You can record some film and say, this is the date of this film and this is my thing. Or you could actually shoot something. Once you've shot something on film, it's yours. It is an expression that is yours. Again, you can record it on tape. It's important. You cannot copyright ideas, remember, just the fixed expression of those ideas. So, so with certain exceptions, copyright allows the owner, as I'm just being redundant here, to protect the material so that you can control reproduction, right? If you've made a film and people are making DVDs of it, then you have the rights to shut them down because they haven't been paying you for that. Or put it online. You can go and say, shut that down. Of course, the world has a lot of trouble with copyright, but we won't go into that. You can control performance. You can control new versioning, right? Someone can't put a play up of your movie if they don't have the rights to it. Same with versioning or adaptation. Someone can't do another version of it unless they have the rights to it, right? Public performances of it. They can't screen your film and charge money if you're not getting payment for that. They can't distribute it. Okay, so those are rights that you own, and it's important to remember that. So what's the procedure for copywriting? Well, copyright registration applications aren't that difficult, really. You can obtain, if you're the author and it's just you, it's pretty simple, and the costs aren't that much. I would say, I think it's, Shane knows this, you can register your script with the WGC or WGA, Writers Guild of America, and I think it's like $30 or something, but you can write to me and remind me of that. Something like $35. It's not that much, okay? So if you've written a script and you want to copyright it and protect it, that's great. And then you can option it to a producer, right? Okay, so copyright. So yeah, I use that example. You can just take your script. It's $25 for WGA East. Thanks, Shane. So that's US, I believe. So we'll say 35. You can take your script, put it in an envelope, date it, mail it, and get it back and keep it sealed. That could work, we'll say. You can register with WGA or WGC. So don't forget about that. What else? Filmmakers, remember, so this is something to remember, like once you learn all this, you're, as a producer, you're a copyright owner, but you're also a copyright user. And you should know how to protect your own work. That's what this is all about. But you also remember that you have to respect the rights of others. So for example, let's make this film, and you write in a song in your script, and that song is owned by someone and a publisher owns it and stuff. You can't use it unless you have their rights. You can't put that, piece of artwork up on the wall in your film. You can't write that into your script, and even in production we can get that far down, unless you have the rights to do that. So and again, all these technicians and artists that work for you on your film, thanks, Jane, they also have skills that they're giving to you, and you need a contract with them, and that could be like a deal memo for crew that come on to work with you. How much are you paying them? What do they get out of it? What do you get out of it? You're paying them for their skills, but you're also paying them the rights to take the work that they contributed to your film, and you still own that film. They don't own a piece of that film, depending on how that contract goes, right? So intellectual property, generally, just another regrouping, generally refers to different areas of law that protect the products of the mind and the personality, and for the purposes of all of these things. So you can trademark them, right? Intellectual property is a term that generally refers to the different areas of law that protect the products of the mind. For our purposes, copyright, really, that's what we're talking about, okay? The original work of authorship, hopefully that's clear to you guys now. There's 2 requirements for work to be an original work of authorship. You must be the author of the work, meaning it is you who created it, such as the writer of a screenplay. And also the work must be original, which means it's not copied from another source. Gets a little tricky at times when we're talking about how original it is, or, you know, it's kind of like in school when you were, you know, plagiarism, that term plagiarism, but that's the general concept of original work. And then, of course, in the States, because they have a union for writers, the Writers Guild of America, which we were just talking about, and there's one in Canada, that there's a work for hire. So a producer can actually hire a writer to write, but whatever they write is owned by the producer because we're paying them. So that's what that agreement is about. So one could say, well, I'm the creator, I wrote it, it's mine, but not if they've written it for you because you hired them. So be aware that you might not own the copyright of the work that you were hired to create for someone else, right? So if you're the writer and someone has hired you, they now own that work. And that's where moral rights come in, which I said I'd skip, but essentially you own the copyright as the producer. So it's important to remember. Exclusive rights, remember I talked about that. I just want to reiterate that, the importance of that. Owning a copyright is different than physically possessing the work. So, right, so you know, maybe someone has a DVD at home of the film that you made, that's quite different. But copyright's not some sort of official document. When you own copyright, you actually own a number of exclusive rights to the work, okay? And I'm going to skip that stuff. So let's go back to the homework. We're just about done. I just want to remind everybody, remember last time we had a 1-page business plan. That was homework. I also asked you to do a title for your project. Pretty simple. The tagline for your project, synopsis for your project, and an image for your project. And they're going to all lead us towards the documentation that we will want to create by next week. So next week, we will be finding the money, where to go to ask people once you get your projects nice and ship-shaped. We're going to talk about successful budgeting and financial scenarios, kind of dig into kind of what that looks like, that A, B, C, and D, and where the money gets spent, but also where the money comes from. And then we'll look at some applications from successful fundwriting. So, you know, I don't know how much detail we'll go into it, but, you know, there's applications to like Canada Council or PEI Arts Council. And then there's applications to CBC and Bell 5, TV1. And then we're going to like look at honing those materials, some examples, and try and get those pitch materials in shape for you guys. And your pitch. That's what we're going to try and get through. So let's wrap up. I think if there's any questions, maybe now you could click on your microphone if you wanted. I think you have the ability, or send me a little email. So there was a comment Renee asked, do you need to do a buyout? So that's where we talked about. Yeah, go on, Renee.
Sorry, I was just wondering about when you were talking about people writing stuff for you. I was just wondering if you need to do a contract that specifically says you own that material, and do you have to do a buyout in that contract? Like, I know that's deeper than we should be getting, but it's just information.
No. Yeah. The answer to that is the writer's agreement would explain that. So you're going to hire the writer to write. If you're optioning a script that's already written, so it's you're just optioning it, that's different. But if the writer is going to create work for you, you're going to write them to hire. Again, in both of those, you would need the language that says, you know, do they make money after? And so in the option we talked about, once you option it and you start to turn it into a film, you'll need to have that language. It's like, oh, I'm the writer and you're making it into a movie. So now in the movie, do I get profit sharing? Which is what we're talking
Right.
about. Like buyout is parts of the profit that comes later. And I said there's we say points, like if they get 5 points, that would be 5% of net profits or gross profits. It's all in the language. The other thing that like the back end, that's another term. So when we say buyout, some, like if you're a union, might not allow you to do buyouts. You have different rules, like ACTRA, for example. They want the actors to get some of that profit. So there's different levels of buyouts. So you might be able to buy them out outright, but you pay more to hire them during the write, or you may pay them a little less during the production and then have to buy them out. Then they have more money they can earn in profit. So it gets complicated, but essentially, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Shannon asked, wondering what kind of idea would be best suited for this exercise? One that is most likely to get funded, or does that matter? So she has lots of ideas and she's wondering which would be the best idea for this exercise. And I would say the one that you're going to submit somewhere first. Like, you know, you can submit 10 projects to CBC by the 24th, and they'll have to look at them all and say yes to no or any of them. So, but pick one that you feel like you're going in this exercise, like the homework I've given you. Take your project that you most likely think will succeed, I guess. Maybe that would be in there. So, I want to just make sure. So thanks again, everyone, for participating. Email me for these PowerPoint slides. Again, this is online, so you can look at that way. Recordings will be available. Renee can explain that, how you can get access. Next week, which is our last week, same time and same place. Here's my contact information, which you have, or you can screenshot, or I'll just put it in the, I can't.